Okay, let's unpack this. There's some phrases that just grab you, aren't there?
Hmm.
Simple words, yet they carry, well, the weight of history and maybe the promise of a better future. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one such incredibly potent idea. Nothing about us without us.
It's a powerful one.
Yeah. Our sources are a really strong collection of articles and excerpts, and they trace this principle from its origins in the disability rights movement right through to its vital application in youth inclusion today.
Right.
So our mission really is to go beyond just hearing the phrase. We want to understand the profound systemic shifts it demands, discovering how its core message keeps evolving and resonating.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, and what our sources really bring to light, is how fundamentally this principle challenges existing power structures.
Right.
And how consistently that challenge has been met with resistance,
Right.
Whether we're talking about disability rights back then or youth advocacy now, it's about moving past a superficial idea of inclusion.
Just checking a box.
Exactly. To reveal the deep transformation this phrase truly demands. And we'll uncover some, well, surprising facts and connections along the way, I think.
That's a great setup. So let's start at the beginning then.
Uh-huh.
The genesis of this powerful idea. Nothing about us without us. As you said, it's not just a catchy slogan, it's a full-fledged philosophy.
Yeah.
What was the deepest frustration that actually sparked this movement within the disability rights community? What was it fundamentally rebelling against?
Well, fundamentally, it was a rebellion against being spoken for, against being defined and controlled by others. Ed Roberts, who was a leading figure in the international disability rights movement, the DRM, he put it so clearly. He said, "If we have learned one thing from the civil rights movement in the U.S., it's that when others speak for you, you lose."
Mm.
Yeah. And this echoes earlier liberation cries, like our bodies, ourselves, from the women's movement or the broader power to the people idea. For DRM activists, this demand for control was universal because globally, the lives of hundreds of millions of people with disabilities were, and often still are, conditioned by dependency, powerlessness, and the heavy hand of paternalism.
That's such a crucial distinction you make there. It's not about being included as a favor or some kind of token gesture,
Right.
which, as the sources point out, is incredibly fragile. That kind of inclusion can just evaporate, can't it?
Yep.
It's entirely dependent on the, let's say, grudging goodwill of those already in power.
Mm-hmm.
And power, our sources remind us, is a habit.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have it rarely give it up willingly, whether they're even conscious of that resistance or not.
Exactly. And this highlights that genuine change really stems from building independent power structures. The real spirit of nothing about us without us is about transforming how we make change. It's not just advocating for a seat at someone else's table.
Which is often the goal you hear about.
Right, but it's more about creating our own table. This means disabled individuals welcoming diverse voices, settling disagreements internally, creating the agenda, and then inviting government officials to join. We see that approach with initiatives like Disability Without Poverty regarding the Canadian disability benefit. It's about claiming power, not, waiting for it to be granted.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Because understanding that the phrase means confronting how society itself actually constructs what we call disability.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just an individual's condition, but how society reacts to it, structures life around it. How do our sources help us grasp that idea?
Well, they dive deep into the very definition of disability. They explain it as a socially constructed category, not purely medical. If you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, for instance, it mirrors the activists' views. It defines disability not as some inherent lack in the person, but as a condition imposed by society. By defining it as something that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities, or even just being regarded as having such an impairment, it shifts the lens, you see, away from individual brokenness and towards societal barriers.
And this societal construction, then, leads to pervasive oppression. Our sources highlight how disability is tragically tied to global poverty and powerlessness, particularly in what were, in the language of the time these sources were written, often called third world or underdeveloped countries.
Yes. Ed Roberts observed that even in developed nations, your ease of life depends massively on income and resources. And Rajendra Vyas recounted millions starving in India, where for many, disability is fundamentally an economic and survival issue. It's not just a medical label. It dictates whether you eat.
That really brings up the question, doesn't it? How do these deeply ingrained cultural and economic factors combine to create such profound marginalization?
Exactly. And we see the painful reality of invisibility and abandonment emerging from these circumstances. Children with disabilities, for instance.
Hmm.
The sources mention they were often hidden due to family shame in places like Thailand and Indonesia.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It is, and even more so in countries like China and Brazil, especially in impoverished rural areas. Families sometimes abandoned disabled children because they were considered useless or just too great an economic burden when resources were already so scarce. It paints a really stark picture of those social and economic pressures.
A truly stark picture.
Hmm.
And it's often compounded by paternalism, which the sources also explore. Brazil's history, for example, with its Portuguese colonial past, the influence of the church, military dictatorships, all that fostered a deeply paternalistic culture.
Mm.
And this denied people with disabilities the intrinsic capacity for or interest in managing responsibilities, essentially stripping them of agency.
Mm.
It immediately makes you think of, like, Ibsen's The Doll's House, right? Where women were historically denied agency under similar patriarchal structures. It's a familiar pattern, just a different context.
Absolutely. It's a pattern that shows up again and again when a group is disempowered. And if we step back to see the wider context, we see how this plays out as institutional oppression across different parts of society.
Like where?
Well, think about education. Historically, schooling wasn't always about empowerment for everyone. It often taught what's called acquiescence to power structures, basically teaching students to passively accept the way things are. For students with disabilities, this often meant segregation, being labeled with terms like mentally retarded, awful terms, and getting an inferior education.
So limiting potential right from the start.
Exactly. Nancy Ward's experience in special ed, which is cited, shows this. She was barred from history classes, given lower grading scales. It didn't just limit aspirations, it could involve actual abuse.
Okay.
Then there's the mass media. Our sources talk about how media manufactures consent by creating an authorized reality.
What does that mean, authorized reality?
It means the media often presented these really limited images of disabled people, predominantly helpless, maybe angry, or sometimes heroic for overcoming against all odds. You know the trope.
The super crip idea.
Right. And Paul Longmore's research on telethons, for instance, showed how they deliberately perpetuated pity. They'd parade these poor, pathetic, crippled children to get donations, cementing public attitudes of pity, not respect or understanding.
And the power of language itself. You mentioned labels earlier. That can't be overstated, can it?
Absolutely not. Terms like cripple, invalid, retard, they carry immense weight. They dehumanize.
Oh.
In Zimbabwe, the sources note the Shona word shirema literally translates to useless. In Brazil, pena implies affliction as punishment. The DRM didn't just accept this. They actively struggled to reform language. They even created terms like personas con discapacidades, in Spanish terms not found in official dictionaries. It was a powerful act of self-definition, reclaiming identity against centuries of these derogatory labels.
So even creating new words was an act of resistance.
A huge one. And sometimes even institutions with good intentions can inadvertently contribute to oppression.
Like charities. Or?
Well, religion, for example, often plays a complex role. Beliefs sometimes link disability to sin, witchcraft, bad karma, displeased ancestors. This was seen in parts of Africa, Palau, Thailand. And while many religious institutions promote charity, they can inadvertently foster pity or offer promises of healing that misrepresent the reality of disability. Some sources mention Brazilians recounting certain evangelical groups viewing disability as a sign of evil spirits. It's subtle, but it's disempowering.
That's a really complex area.
It is. And similarly, charities. Despite their good aims, they are also critically examined in our sources. They can sometimes function as an agency of control, fostering dependency, isolating individuals. Joshua Malinga and Billy Golfus argued powerfully that charities can end up controlling other people's lives, seeing themselves as helping the helpless, which can, perpetuate that cycle of dependency instead of promoting self-reliance.
Right. And finally, the sources touch on the really harsh realities of violence and inaccessibility. These feel like the physical manifestations of all these systemic issues.
Definitely. Violence is both a cause and a consequence of disability, especially in impoverished urban areas like Rio or Johannesburg, making disabled people easy targets. And accessibility, it's not just about ramps, is it? It's a profound social construct. The lack of services, transportation, the huge rural-urban disparities, they create immense barriers globally. They make daily life an exhausting struggle for millions.
What's truly striking here isn't just the sheer number of barriers, but how profoundly society has historically, externalized responsibility, treating disability like it's just an individual's problem.
Instead of a systemic failure in design and empathy.
Right.
That's that insidious authorized reality that nothing about us without us fundamentally aims to shatter. And it's a realization that still feels relevant even today because these systems are so deeply entrenched.
Okay, after hearing about such entrenched systemic barriers, it's easy to feel a bit overwhelmed, maybe even despairing. But what our sources reveal next is truly inspiring. How individuals, recognizing these injustices, didn't just give up. They began to forge a powerful global movement fueled by a new, shared consciousness. So what did this raised consciousness actually mean for people on the ground?
Well, it was profoundly liberating. Raised consciousness isn't just an intellectual thing, it's an experiential shift. It moves you from seeing disability as like a personal medical tragedy to understanding it as a social condition created by societal barriers. This replaces that individual isolation with association and connection. It's a process often called conscientization, basically, developing a critical awareness of your social reality and realizing you have the capacity to actively transform it. It's about realizing you're not alone, you're part of something bigger, and your experience is shared, not some unique burden.
And from that shared understanding, that raised consciousness, key strategies and achievements of the DRM really began to take shape.
Yeah.
First, you mentioned the crucial act of establishing history and culture, documenting lived experiences, fostering disability culture through art, music, dance, athletics.
Yes, creating their own narrative.
Second, language reform, which we touched on, deliberately changing language to unlock self-identification, like that international effort to move from cripple to person with a disability.
Sure.
And third, the simple, powerful act of organizing, the rise of thousands of disability-related organizations, self-help groups, and these strong international confederations like Disabled People's International, DPI.
Exactly. And the sources are just full of powerful anecdotes of this individual transformation feeding into collective action. You have Rangamupindu organizing strikes within institutions. Judy Penko-Race, who initially just saw herself as a businesswoman, described her greeting, her awakening through transportation advocacy, realizing her common cause with other disabled activists. Rachel Hurst said her consciousness was raised almost overnight after starting to use a wheelchair, which quickly propelled her into collective action. Danilo Delfin's commitment to organizing really solidified after that eye-opening 1981 Singapore DPI conference. These individual shifts genuinely fueled the collective.
And you mentioned independent living centers, too.
Yes, the CIL.
Yeah.
Like the first one in what was then called the Third World, established in Rio in 1990. These were crucial non-residential hubs for advocacy and support, really embodying that spirit of self-determination.
So these efforts, they ultimately led to evolving goals, didn't they? I remember Carol Gill and Johnny Crescendo had this powerful insight.
Yes, that the struggle isn't just for integration, but for power. Once people with disabilities have power, then they can integrate, but on their own terms, seeking interdependence, not just inclusion as some kind of favor. It's a total reframing of the end goal.
That concept, power, as a prerequisite for true, meaningful integration that feels like an absolutely vital takeaway, and one that resonates far beyond just the disability community, I think.
Absolutely. It's universal.
Now, this deep dive isn't just about looking back at history, fascinating as it is. It's really about how these profound lessons are being applied right now, especially when it comes to the largest generation of youth the world has ever seen. The principle of nothing about us without us is finding a new critical home in the youth inclusion movement.
And what's incredibly significant here is the sheer scale we're talking about. 1.8 billion young people between 10 and 24. This is a generation disproportionately affected by global issues, conflict, climate change, economic instability. Yet they're demonstrating incredible resilience and innovation.
So you see it everywhere.
You do. And there's a growing recognition that centering youth voices isn't just, nice practice. It's absolutely essential for developing effective, sustainable solutions to the challenges they face and the world they'll inherit. Ignoring them means missing out on vital insights and energy.
Yet despite this massive demographic, despite their critical role, youth voices are still too often marginalized, aren't they?
Sadly, yes.
Our sources highlight a really startling statistic.
Yeah.
Less than 1% of child and adolescent health studies back in 2019 actually used a youth advisory group.
Less than 1%.
It just reveals this huge gap between research that is about young people and research that genuinely includes them. And this rings especially true, the sources note, for adolescent girls. They often face unique and significant structural barriers, things like oppressive social norms, cultural biases, lack of educational opportunities that systematically silence their perspectives even further.
Which raises a critical question. Why does genuine, deep youth inclusion matter so profoundly for research outcomes today? Why is it so important? Well, first, it brings fresh perspectives and innovation. Young people's inherent familiarity with technology, with social trends. It offers truly innovative ideas that can revitalize traditional research. And it helps ensure knowledge actually reaches them in relevant ways. They often see solutions older generations just miss.
That makes sense.
Second, it achieves long-term impact. Involving youth ensures outcomes aren't just for now, but are relevant to future social circumstances. It leads to more sustainable solutions that address the world they will inherit, not just the world we currently know.
Thinking ahead.
Exactly. And third, it fosters diversity and representation. Including youth from various backgrounds gives us a much more holistic view of society. It ensures research truly reflects the needs of all demographic groups, not just those traditionally studied or easiest to reach. Ultimately, who better to understand their needs than young people themselves?
Okay, so if simply calling for youth inclusion is one thing, how can we actually move from just talking about youth to genuinely centering their voice? The sources offer some concrete, actionable steps here for real engagement.
Yes, moving beyond tokenism.
Right. This includes always giving feedback, showing youth precisely how their individual ideas make a tangible difference. That's so crucial for validation, for keeping them engaged. It means actively considering cultural and contextual factors, reducing barriers, directly addressing power imbalances, especially for historically excluded groups. We also need to provide professional learning for youth in research methods and data analysis, allocating real resources for collaboration, for leadership roles, not just asking their opinion.
Lifting capacity.
Exactly. And crucially, supporting youth in taking action based on research findings, mentoring them to inform practice, to facilitate actual change in their communities.
And we are seeing real-world examples of how youth voices are being centered today, which is encouraging. It shows this isn't just theory. Think about the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on climate change. That provides practical, outcome-focused advice directly from incredibly diverse youth perspectives.
And that's a high-profile one.
It is. There's also Youth Participatory Action Research, or YPR. It's this innovative approach where adolescents themselves construct knowledge. They identify problems, they address them through partnerships with adults. They really drive the research agenda. Organizations like CORC UK use something called the Lundy model to ensure children and young people have dedicated spaces for their views to be heard and critically acted upon.
Just closing the loop.
Right. UNICEF's Voices of Youth U report builds this massive digital community for and by young people, shaping policies with real-time insights from millions. And Innovations for Youth, I4Y, also serves as a cross-disciplinary hub for youth equity research, really putting young people's experiences at the core.
What an incredible journey we've taken, really. From the fierce independence and collective action of the disability rights movement to these contemporary, powerful calls for youth empowerment, it just highlights the enduring power of nothing about us without us across different liberation struggles, doesn't it?
It really does.
Consistently emphasizing how it challenges those systemic power imbalances and inspires collective action across generations and communities.
Yeah, this really underscores that the spirit of nothing about us without us is a continuous universal call for empowerment. It's a recognition that true progress stems from those directly impacted, empowering them to create their own tables, define their own terms, shape their own liberation stories. It reminds us that across all communities, the struggle for self-determination against these ingrained power structures is, well, it's a fundamental human endeavor. It constantly requires vigilance and collective action.
So as you go about your day, maybe consider where, in your world, in your communities, there might be a call, spoken or unspoken, for nothing about us without us. Well, how might understanding this powerful principle challenge assumptions and perhaps spark some new conversations for you?